Hello, everyone. A few of the people that I regularly talk to are hardcore Guild War 2 players. Hardcore in the sense that they're there almost every day and they do a lot of World v World and PvP. They still do some PvE, but just not as much as the other two. When I was talking to them, they were saying that Willbenders just really suck in PvP along with Deadeyes. Naturally, I raised an eyebrow at this because I've been theory crafting for so many games that I know the chances for something to truly suck are pretty slim. Usually what happens is something sucks because somebody isn't doing something right or isn't applying the correct logic to that. Sure enough, I looked at everything and I think that's what I'm starting to see. I'll go over the stepping process and how I achieved this so you can understand everything. Right, okay, first thing I did was I looked all over Google for builds, whether they were meta or just normal builds, and then I took all of those builds and I shoved them into the calculator that you see here. My goal was to achieve a baseline of where people are in terms of the numbers and what I could do better in the numbers. Once I had a set number to run on, then I decided to try my own combinations in the calculator. I worked out many different combinations or different pieces, if you will. I eventually found that only one set really works for what I'm trying to do for each build, in terms of being optimal anyways. That's how I achieved the builds that you're about to see here in a minute. So last thing I will go and say is why I'm doing both Willbender and Deadeye. I'm doing both because of what the people say, and also because I do think that these have the potential to be some of the best specializations in PvP. So let me start with Willbender. Okay, I've noticed in a lot of YouTube videos that people are trying to treat Willbender as a stand-up fighter. You can certainly do that with Willbender. It's just going to require a different thought process than most people are used to, is what I'm starting to think based on what I've seen, both in the numbers and the YouTube video. A lot of people are running Willbender with dual swords, which I don't think is the correct move for a stand-up fighter. I think that works best with a hit and run build, and of course I'll show you that. I'll show you both builds, but I just want to quickly get through this. So if you're doing a stand-up fighter, I don't think that you should be using the dual blades. I think you actually should be using the hammer, because the hammer has more AoE, and it can still do a considerable amount of single target damage whilst having sustain in comparison to dual swords. So let me go and get through both builds so you can see what I'm talking about. For starters, on the equipment, you will notice that I am running Celestial in the calculator. I have determined that Celestial is the best for either the hit and run build or the stand-up fighting build. Though with the hit and run build, if you can't afford Celestial yet, you can afford to use a combination of Valkyrie and Captains or Dragon and Knight until you can get up to Celestial. But unfortunately, the stand-up build, I just can't see any way around Celestial. But moving on, the next thing that you need to be aware of in the equipment page is that I am using Runes of Divinity for the Willbender builds. Rune of Divinity, just like Celestial, is plus to all stats. But more specifically, Runes of Divinity does say plus 10% health, which does give you a lot more room to take hits in addition to the all stats. That's why I have Runes of Divinity in there. As far as the infusions are concerned, they're precision on every single one. Without the precision infusion, the crit chance was 41%. Given that this build is going to run on crits, along with the other stats, I thought 4% more chance to crit was a good idea. Lastly, I am using something else different, because I notice a lot of builds run the square-looking things, but I'm actually running, I guess it's a jewel or gem, I'm not sure what you would call it, but anyways, let me show you. So for this, I am running Opal Orbs instead of those square-looking things. I completely forget the name right now, but either way, that's what I'm running. So let me show you the trees for both builds so you can kind of understand why I'm doing everything at once. Let's see, specialization. Okay, so this is the stand-up build tree. The reason I have Radiance in here is because of the middle one, I think it is. Let me see. Yep, sort of middle. Okay. So Zealot's Flame triggers whenever you do a critical strike is more or less the gist here. So if you look at the Guild Wars 2 official wiki, burning stacks can stack way more than anything else. The idea here is because you're a stand-up fighter and you're able to put yourself close enough for that AoE to trigger on not just your skills, but all the other stuff like Zealot's Flame, then you're going to stack this with one of the other abilities that also causes burning. But yes, I have that. And then another purpose for Radiance in the stand-up build is this one right here. Let's see, it's over here. Okay, perfect inscriptions. There's a very good reason that I have this on the stand-up build, and again, you'll see when I switch over to the skills, so that you can see that. But perfect inscriptions is, in my opinion, a lot better than the one above it, because really at this point, the build is on a sustained damage mentality. You're not looking to score huge hits like Deadeye is. So for that reason, I'm not too concerned about doing more damage. I'm more concerned about staying in the fight as long as possible. That helps me to achieve it. So let me flip over to skills now so you can see that. Okay. So you'll notice the green number there. That's what it is after that passive at the end of Radiance. So at the end of Radiance, it's saying that signets become a lot better or stronger. I forget what the exact wording is, but either way, so it brings the cooldown from 30 seconds to 24, and also, in addition to changing the cooldown, it changes the intervals. You'll notice that with the description. It says cure a condition from yourself every few seconds. When you have that passive I just showed you, it brings that interval from 10 seconds to 8. So you get a 6-second faster cooldown and 2 more second cooldown on the intervals. So 24 and 8, which I think helps a lot with the stand-up building. Because now, one of your biggest heals is on a 24-second timer. And if it's not in use, it's also curing conditions. More or less is the thought process here. Let me talk about the Elite, as this will apply now to really both builds. With this one, people were saying that Willbender has too long of an activation time, so this would be a great way to resolve that. Not only that, you're getting other bonuses in the process of that. Yeah, because you're getting Fury on top of that, so given that we are running critical strikes, this works out great for that. And the only other thing that remains a constant between both builds is going to be the other shout. Hold the line. So hold the line would have had 20 seconds if I had pure voice from the, I think it was honor tree. So unfortunately without that it's 25 seconds, but it's a great way to get at the regeneration boon, so that you can hopefully heal yourself for a little bit without having to resort to your signet, because you want to leave the signet alone as much as possible. But as far as the other two, we are I am using Rolling Light in this build. Rolling Light is a great way to break stun, cause some damage in the process. And the other one, Purging Flames. This is what I was talking about with the whole Zealot's Flame thing. So between this and Zealot's Flame, you should be able to stack the burns pretty easily, while also simultaneously curing conditions from yourself in the process of that. So there's your stand-up build. Let me switch over to the hit and run build. Let's see. Okay, so for the hit and run build, you'll notice it is using dual swords, and it's changed out one of the abilities, which was Purging Flames. Purging Flames has been replaced by, what is that called again? Whirling Light, because it's 3 burn stacks, and it's another one of your directional abilities. So what you want to do in the hit and run build in comparison to the stand-up build is to use all of your F1s, F1 through F3s, as well as any directional stuff that you may have, which would include this ability. Where is it? Oh, not that one. This one and this one, yeah. So you're 2 and 5. So yeah, 2 and 5, and then you're 7, at least on this calculator. So you want to kind of rotate between those and your F1 through F3s to kind of hit the target, bounce back and a little bit, and then advance again. And just do this rinse, wash, repeat of different directions and avoiding the enemy. So for that particular purpose, I did change one of the passives. So let me show you that. So you'll notice that there's Honor here instead of Radiance. Both are running Virtues and Willbender, but this is the one difference between the hit and run and the stand-up build. The reason I'm running Honor as instead of Radiance for this particular hit and run build is for pure voice, so that I have so that the build has Fear My Wrath on a lower cooldown, along with Hold Your Ground, which I guess you could replace with another directional ability if you wanted to. I guess that doesn't have to be that way, but you can do it either way. But either way, it helps with Fear My Wrath, and it gives you stamina regeneration. If at any point it's not possible to go in a direction because you have to quickly avoid a massive attack or something, just dodge out of the way. You have the stamina regeneration to do that. Once you dodge out of the way, then advance forward once that ability has cleared, and there you go. There's your hit and run build. That's all you have to do. The stand-up fighting build is pretty brainless in comparison. It's just get in their face using F1, and then just hammer away. So there you have it. There's the 2 builds. One runs hammer and one's 2 swords. That's how you have to think about it. Let's talk about Deadeye now. Okay. So, yeah, I noticed that Deadeye meta builds, for the most part, will have around 1700 vitality, no bonus toughness. Critical damage was around 215%, and the crit chance was between 46 to 49%, depending on the build. Those were the stats that I noticed doing so. Therefore, I decided to do something a little bit different. I recognized that at least part of the problem with Deadeye's was, 1, people are, in my opinion, using it wrong, and 2, they're not in any position to take a hit. Having vitality is good, but in any game, if you don't have armor to back up that massive HP pool, it really doesn't mean much. But that's a problem that I have easily corrected and kind of balanced out with this particular build. So in the Willbender build, I'm running Precision Infusions, along with Rune of Divinity and Celestial, plus the Opal Orbs. This one's the complete opposite. I'm actually using Vitality Infusions, and I'm using another set of plus all attribute runes. So you can see why I'm combining these 2 builds into the same recording. It's because they're running on a similar principle or logic, in that the runes are kind of the same, and the thought process of building them is kind of the same. But either way, I'm using Runes of the Traveler. I'll get into that in a bit. along with the new dragon and affix suffix, and backed up by knights. And so I'm going to explain all of that. Okay, so now that I've kind of laid out where builds are, you'll notice that I am using dragons with knights. The reason I did that was because if you compare knights to captains, captains is more precision, whereas knights has more toughness. I decided that my crit chance would be high enough as is. You can see I've achieved 55%, so I'm well past what the meta builds are. I decided that toughness would be better than an additional 5% crit chance. Those were the number differences I was seeing between going from captains to knight. Was my precision went, or my chance to crit went from 55 to 60. I didn't really see a need to go all the way up to 60. I felt toughness was better, so you can see I did that. So in comparison to the meta builds, I did lose around 200 vitality, but I came back a crap ton of toughness. I have 700 more toughness than the average Deadeye build. That alone, I think, would compensate for that loss in vitality, because now that I have more toughness, every piece of vitality that I have is worth more. I did lose some crit damage, but not by much. You can see it's not that far off from the meta builds, while I'm still maintaining a much higher toughness rating and better crit chance, as well as better boon duration. So in order to achieve that, I did a little bit different. So unlike the last build, I'm running ruby orbs instead of opal orbs. Vital infusions, and of course everything else you see. So Runes of Traveler is also here. Okay, so now let me go into the tree so I can explain why I have all this going. Okay, so you'll notice that this particular Deadeye build is running Acrobatics instead of Trickery. I notice most builds do run Trickery. I get it, it's plus initiative, well, max initiative, I should say, as well as reduce cooldown on the ability that lets you restore initiative. I completely understand why they did that, but I don't think that's the right answer here. And I think that critical strikes is pretty much mandatory, because your job is to do damage, and critical strikes makes up for a good chunk of the damage by itself, although when it's combined with some of the Deadeye perks, it does account for even more damage. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get all to that. So okay, so you'll notice under Deadeye, I've changed one thing. Everybody runs the rifle perk above it, but I'm actually running premeditation on this build. Why? It's because I've done the math and course calculations on a lot of this stuff, and I recognized very quickly that while plus precision is great, I already have a ton of precision. Stealth is great too, but if you're running rifle, you shouldn't need stealth as much as people make it out to be, because you have 1200 range on the rifle. If you're doing any of the crap that I see people doing on the YouTube videos, which is where they're getting point blank with people, don't be doing that. You're a ranged unit. You're not a melee unit. If you want to go point blank and get in somebody's face, go play the Willbender build I just gave you. Seriously, you should not be in somebody's face. You need to utilize the range that you have to beat your opponent. That's what you need to do if you're running rifle. So you should not need stealth if you're at 1200 range. The other thing too is the Runes of the Traveler. This kind of helps with that whole scenario. Rune of the Traveler gives you 25% movement speed. So if you're up against a Willbender or Catalyst, both of which have plus movement speed, and you make a mistake, then you should have the ability to get out of there with Rune of the Traveler due to the fact that you have 25% more movement speed. So between that and your range, you should not be anywhere in vicinity of another person. You should be at a distance where stealth doesn't matter or isn't really necessary. Now, obviously, it's good to have as an emergency exit, but as far as making it a part of the build focus, I don't agree with that at all. Between the fact that you have range and the fact that you can do more damage with this one passive than the rifle passive. In addition to this, it does make the build a little more versatile. It actually allows you to use pistols instead of rifles if absolutely necessary. So if you are one of those derpy people that decide to get in somebody's face, then at the very least you have something to work with. So, moving on. I did notice quite a bit of Deadeye builds were not running a Maleficent 7. Given that this is a boon build, it made sense to do it. Plus, it restores 7 initiative once you reach the maximum mallet stacks, so no brainer there. Moving on. Okay. Acrobatics here is for the defensive purposes. So your first 2 defensive purposes are right here and here. So it says when a healing skill is applied, which means the passive that you'll see later on and your signet. Those are 2 things that will trigger your vigor. Now, if you're not using the vigor for dodging, it's still adding 1% damage because that premeditation under Deadeye says 1% more damage per boon. So adding vigor to the mix is another 1% damage, which is great because now it's like, well, if you're not using it for defensive purposes and getting out of the way, it's still doing something for the build because it is, at the end of the day, 1% more damage. Moving on. Where is it? Ah, yes. Here's the other important thing. Because we are running a boon build, notice what this says, plus 240 concentration. Between this passive and premeditation, it's giving you 240 and another 180 from the 2 passives in terms of concentration, which makes it possible now for this build to not worry about concentration. I don't have to worry about building in. And there's the other half of the reason for using Superior Rune of the Traveler, because it does say plus 15% boon duration, plus all stats. Essentially, you're getting around, I think it's, if I did the math right, it was between 16 to 17% total boon duration between the plus all stats and also the raw 15% from the set bonus. So yes, there's a very good reason for me running Acrobatics. It's more than a defensive reason. It's also because I'm getting passive concentration and passive damage because of the way the Deadeye passives are built. Here's the passive I was mentioning earlier. So that whole you gain vigor when you heal, this passive does trigger it, and the one in critical strikes does too. But that's a completely separate mess. I'll have to really explain that one here in a minute. But your signet also does it. So moving on. Let me see, where is it? Ah, yes. So this does have a 2-second cooldown, but this gives you might when you gain fury, so you gain 3 stacks of might for doing that. So it's a great way to make sure you're stacking as early as possible. This gives you fury whenever you strike an enemy above 90% health. So usually your first target is going to be the one where you'll really start to stack early on. This was the other important thing. Now, below it is the pistol passive, the one that says that pistols do 5% reduced damage and gain piercing. While that build can be good, the problem is it's too specific. Not only that, you would lose a ton of ferocity without this being present. An absolute ton of ferocity. Well, actually I should say critical damage. So there's really no debate here. And if you're running this build, it has to be ran that way. Moving on. Let me see, which one is it? It's... Oh, yeah, it's that one. Okay, this is the only part of the passive tree where things can change. If you're running rifle, I would recommend running no quarter. But if you're running with dual pistols, then I would suggest that you move down to this ability. Invigorating Precision. Between this and the one that's in Acrobatics, that's 2 sources of healing plus 3 with the signet. So if you are running dual pistols, then at least you'd have the ability to gain your health back whenever you are hitting an enemy. And of course, I'll go over that whole mess now. Okay, so dual pistol versus rifle. Rifles have 1200 range and pistols have 900. Rifles have more single target abilities than pistols do. Pistols are kind of, well, I should say dual pistols, are kind of spread out between some CC between the number 5 and I think it's the number 2. Number 2 being the bola, number 5 being the blinding powder. So you definitely have some access to some utility skills when you're running dual pistols, but not so much when you're running rifles. The other major difference that I'm starting to see, at least in the numbers, is that dual pistols with its ability where you blast away can do more damage than the rifle, assuming it's not in its shooting position. If you're just standing up and firing, then you're not going to be achieving the full possible damage of all of your abilities. But pistols, well, dual pistols, achieve their damage all the time because there's nothing related to stances or anything in there. That said, if you are going to be that derpy person that I'm seeing in YouTube videos, it's just going right up in that person's face and blasting away, then do it with pistols. Don't do it with rifle. You'll do more damage and you'll have access to more utilities than if you were to use a rifle. This entire theory I've put together, this theory build, is specifically designed to be utilized in, well, both builds really are designed to be used in PvE, PvP, and World v World. The only thing that ever changes with these builds is their weapons that are currently equipped. So, again, if you are going to be that derpy person I'm seeing in YouTube videos, please, for all that's holy, just grab dual pistols and do things that way. But if you're more calculated and have more situational awareness, then use a rifle. That's the only two differences you're making, but otherwise the build remains the same. So there you have it. There's my theories. I hope I've explained it well enough. If I haven't, feel free to ask me in the comments. Thanks for listening.